At this time, I'd like to welcome you to our special meeting and thank you for being here this evening. I would like to at this time call to the podium Mr. Earl Vaughn, who has previously been a pastor here in the Presbyterian Church, and he's going to lead us in our invocation. We will all please rise.
Father God, as this commission meets tonight, the governing body of this community, we pray for them. We thank you for their service and pray that you'll continue to use them and bless what they do. Be with us tonight. We pray that we know that you care about the government of the people, and we pray that you'll be with us all that is said and done here, that it may be in accord with your holy and righteous will. And we pray this in the precious holy name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. At this time, do I have a motion to approve our agenda as it is before you?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Seeing none opposed. This evening we have a presentation, and this is from Mr. Jim Cawley III regarding his investigation into allegations of ethical misconduct and inappropriate protocols related to the Lone Survivor Project. So at this time I will turn it over to Mr. Cawley.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board.
They said they can't hear. Is the mic on?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just pull it
should
up a
be
little
in. I
more. That
think
might help. There you go.
Yeah.
If it'll stay. Thank you.
I'm not real sure or real clear what the board wants tonight in terms of time, detail. You want me to walk completely through the report with you? Is that the desire of the board? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Seeing nods.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Well, buckle up. Let me first of all give you a little bit of background for those who may not know why I'm in front of you. You have a big crowd tonight, and where I've been and how I got here. So a little bit of background. I practice mostly local government law with the firm Cawley Pridgeon. I've been doing that for over 30 years. We have 8 lawyers in 3 offices, Raleigh, Wilson, and Kinston. Our practice is primarily from Raleigh to the coast. We do get down in this area from time to time. A number of lawyers in our firm, much like your town attorney, we serve as appointed attorneys for several local governments. We also do special project works for a number of local governments. We're not at the meetings, but we do assigned tasks, special projects, litigation matters. I'm still not going. How about now?
They still.
That mic on?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
It's
it's on.
There's no way
No,
to turn it
no,
up.
there's no way to turn it up, I don't think.
It's not on. Look.
It's not?
In this
It may,
case,
may not be on.
Ah. Okay.
Plug it in.
Oopsie. Oopsie.
how about now?
That's better.
Thank you, Shane.
I think you heard the background. I won't repeat any of that. But the point is, we've been doing this kind of work, not investigations in particular, but work related to local government for a long time. We were asked in this case to review a specific transaction, and that's the transaction with the Lone Survivor Foundation, or the contemplated transaction with the Lone Survivor Foundation. There was a specific scope an assignment that we were tasked with, and that is that came from the board minutes, and I'll read that in a moment. But it was rather broad, and so there was no particular assignment of issues, of specific issues. We were sort of left to determine what issues we saw as important. In talking to each of you, some of the issues were brought to light, brought to our attention, and we explored some of those. We also identified some on our own. The scope of the work included 17 interviews. That included each of you, the town manager, finance officer, clerk, assistant clerk, town attorney, the chairman of the board of the Lone Survivor Foundation and its former executive director, and two nice ladies who cover everything that goes on in Hope Mills from a media standpoint. Also, the executive director and business development director of the Fayetteville Cumberland EDC were interviewed. We reviewed literally thousands of pages of documents that came from all sources. Some came directly from you. If I could ask Commissioner Larson to hold that notebook up, that was something she prepared and provided for us, an extensive chronology of the events surrounding the contemplated transaction. Your town attorney provided numerous documents. We reviewed minutes, newspaper articles, your rules of procedure, your ethical code, etc. We also reviewed minutes of not every meeting during that time period. Well, I will say we did review the minutes, but not the videos of every meeting during that time period, but we did review the minutes. And the time period is from December of 17 to November of 18. Let me give you the specific assignment, and then I want to talk about some of the resources we relied upon before we start getting into our analysis of the facts. We were retained to investigate the sequence of events involving the Lone Survivor Foundation's interest in town-owned property for development of a retreat center and the related interactions between LSF, Fayetteville EDC, and the town of Hope Mills. The specific scope of the assignment read as follows. The board commissions an investigation into 1, allegations of ethical misconduct by members of the town of Hope Mills Town Board of Commissioners, mayor and commissioners, and town staff pertaining to various sections of the town's code of ethics and conduct for town officials, and 2, allegations of inappropriate protocols used by all parties during the decision-making process regarding all official correspondence and offers to purchase/lease municipal property presented or submitted by the Lone Survivor Foundation to the town of Hope Mills during the period previously mentioned. In looking at that assignment, we drew from a number of resources that we deemed to be relevant to the inquiry. 14-234.1 is a general statute entitled Misuse of Confidential Information. 14-234, public officers or employees benefiting from public contract. GS 158-7.1 regarding local development procedures.
160A-67, which addresses general powers of the mayor and council. 160A-69, entitled, "The Mayor is to preside over the council." 160A-81, which addresses the conduct of public hearings. 160A-86, which is entitled Local Governing Boards Code of Ethics. It's a statute that requires you to have a code of ethics. 160A-87, which is the Ethics Education Program requirement, which requires all elected officials to take ethics training. 143.318.10, all official meetings of public bodies are open to the public. 143.318.11, which addresses closed session requirements and the appropriate or permissible matters for closed sessions. The Town of Hope Mills Rules of Procedure, Town of Hope Mills Code of Ethics for elected officials, the International City Managers Association Code of Ethics, the North Carolina State Bar Rules of Professional Conduct, and the Oath of Office for North Carolina elected officials. We also, as a part of the review, interviewed several other professional managers to get their take confidentially without identifying the jurisdiction on some of the procedures. Some other professional economic developers, some other town attorneys, and an instructor for the ethics class, the GS 160A-87 ethics class, who is certified to provide that training. I went through some of the factual scenarios with him as well. So that's the assignment. That's what we looked at, and then we did the interviews and reviewed the documents to gauge the conduct against those standards. Now I have to admit, when I took this assignment, I'm sure I didn't know what it was, or the scope of it, because I came into it thinking we were looking at the factual and legal issues around a land transaction. I didn't fully comprehend that the land transaction never occurred, and what you were really looking for was an analysis of maybe why it didn't occur, how to do it better, and some of the politics around the issues involved. In looking at the issues, 12 particular issues were identified and stood out to me. This is not a Mueller scenario where I'm going to tell you that the report speaks for itself and we're done. I'll try to answer questions if you have them. But it may be a matter of you identify issues that you think need to be looked at and we just didn't look at them. And you may want to revisit some things. But we identified 12 issues that we thought were worthy of review. And I've also got to add that early in my career, I had a client who he was on a board I represented, and he was the former commanding general of Camp Lejeune. He had been there in the late 70s, and I always admired the way he saw things in black and white. And my world is gray. A lot of the standards that we're gauging conduct against are not that clear, not that objective. They tend to be very subjective. So they include questions such as, is it legal? Which tends to be a little more clear. Is it ethical? Which often gets very gray when you're comparing or gauging ethical conduct by an ethics code. You know, or I know, whether it's right or wrong, but you may not be able to gauge from an ethics code whether conduct is right or wrong. It is often gray. So is it legal? Is it ethical? And the third standard we tend to gauge things by is it a good practice? Is it good protocol? Is there a better way? Again, these specific issues were not identified to us or dictated to us. They were determined on our own. We are going to use terms in the report, and they're intended to have their usual and ordinary meanings, such as improper is used, and that could be illegal, unethical, or out of order. Unethical would be conduct in violation of an ethical code. And out of order is intended to describe conduct that is neither unlawful nor unethical, but is not necessarily the best practice or the best way to, in our opinion, to do something. By way of overview, and then I'll get into how we broke the review down into three different parts, but the investigation, as I've indicated, included extensive document review and interviews, and has been consistent with the assigned scope. We were given clear instructions. I was given clear instructions that the investigation was not an effort to rationalize, excuse, save from embarrassment, or defend prior actions. I was told in defining the scope and taking this assignment that the town board requested a candid and constructive autopsy analysis of the sequence of events involving the interest in and efforts to purchase a portion of the town-owned property commonly known as Lake Number 2 by the Lone Survivor Foundation. Specific goals of this process, as explained to me, were for the board to learn from the process, avoid repeating any mistakes made, and do a better job with economic development in the future. The conclusions reached are the opinions of the author, which is me. And in some cases, they are limited due to my inability to conclusively determine the state of mind or motivations of persons interviewed. Some of the conclusions are not based on what could be proven, but are instead based on my experiences and perceptions. It is acknowledged that the findings in this report will not satisfy everyone with either an interest in the subject matter or an interest in observing local politics. Here's the timeline that outlines some of the key dates and events in the process. February 27, 2018. LSF, following a meeting with and assistance from town staff, begins to investigate the suitability of Lake Number 2 for its project. June 4, 2018. This board holds two closed sessions regarding the LSF Economic Development Project. The general consensus was that the board was interested in the project pending further research. June 11. Consensus of the board was not to sell the property in fee simple, but to further research the possibility of a lease or a sale with a right of reverter. June the 18th, board consensus was not to move forward with the proposal. On on July the 9th, the project, which had previously only been discussed in closed session, was mentioned at an open board meeting. On July the 16th, there was a letter from the town attorney to the foundation declining their proposal. On July 23rd, the board voted in open session to schedule a public hearing on the foundation's request. On August 1st, the board voted again in open session to cancel that public hearing and wait for the town's pending parks plan. On October 1st, a formal offer to purchase and an earnest money deposit was submitted by the foundation. On October the 8th, the board held a closed session regarding that offer and voted to decline the offer. And then on the 22nd, the board held another closed session to receive legal advice from the town attorney. One other point about the interviews, unlike the ones associated with the Mueller report, all of the interviews that I did were voluntary. There were no subpoenas. There was no threat of perjury. And I'd be remiss not to give my thanks to those who took their time, including the board and the mayor, to do that. The town staff, the Lone Survivor Foundation, the economic development officials, and the local media. Everyone volunteered their time and I thought gave me largely candid responses to my questions. I'll give you the summary of the findings, and then I'll get into the details. In our review of the project and the related interactions between the town, the EDC, and the foundation, we divided the review into 3 phases. Number 1, the arrival of the foundation project and its review by town staff. Number 2, the review of the project by the town's Board of Commissioners. And number 3, the return of the project to the commissioners by virtue of the presentation of a formal offer by the foundation. The summary findings from the investigation are as follows. Number 1, the allegations of ethical misconduct by any party are unfounded. Number 2, the allegations of inappropriate protocols by town staff are confirmed. And number 3, the allegations of inappropriate protocols by the Fayetteville Cumberland EDC staff are unfounded. First phase, the project arrives and it's reviewed by staff. From 2016 to 2018, our research indicated that the foundation was in search of a site for construction of a new facility. A site in Linden, North Carolina, which is also located in Cumberland County, was donated to the foundation, and plans for a facility on that site were publicly reported in a March 8, 2017 article in the Fayetteville Observer. Later in 2017, that site was ultimately determined by the foundation not to be suitable due to lack of sewer availability and soils unsuitable for an in-ground septic system. As a result, that site was returned to the donor. As the foundation's property search continued, the foundation board president, Tim Byram, was introduced to the Fayetteville Cumberland EDC chair through a mutual acquaintance and project supporter. The EDC began assisting the foundation with its search for a suitable property. With the assistance of Fayetteville Cumberland EDC President and CEO Robert Van Giens and the EDC Director of Business Development Teddy Warner, approximately 40 to 50 potential sites were reviewed in an effort to locate a site with the criteria desired by the foundation. For a variety of reasons, the site that was ultimately determined by foundation officials to be most suitable to meet their needs was Lake Number 2, a site owned by the town that had seen only minimal activity or use of any kind in decades. On March 27, 2018, during a meeting at Town Hall, the EDC staff introduced the foundation officials to town staff, and the foundation expressed interest to the town staff in the Lake Number 2 site. Present at that meeting were the mayor, town manager, finance director, EDC business development director, EDC board member, and foundation executive director. Specific terms of a land purchase were not discussed at that meeting. Instead, the foundation and/or the EDC requested the opportunity to confidentially investigate further and conduct due diligence on the site. At this early stage, having just been informed of the foundation's interest, the town staff was uncertain, 1, whether the site was suitable, 2, whether there would be an offer forthcoming from the foundation, 3, what the terms of any such offer might be, that is, purchase, lease, the acreage involved, etc., and 4, whether the foundation would be requesting incentives for the project from the town, and if so, what the nature and amount of those incentives might be. Following that meeting, the town staff looked at the site and determined that it needed some sprucing up. Trash was cleaned up, the ditch bank was cleaned up, some public works laydown materials that had been piling up there were cleaned up, and the whole property was made a little more presentable for showing. Other than cooperation in their ongoing search for a suitable site, nothing was promised to the foundation or the EDC by the town staff. However, the mayor and the town staff were openly enthusiastic about the potential project. Over the course of the next 2 months, the site at Lake Number 2 was inspected and environmental assessments were performed by the EDC at its expense with the consent of town staff and with property access being accommodated by town staff. The town staff's reaction to the project remained positive, and the staff assisted the foundation and the EDC with their due diligence efforts to determine the suitability of the site. The expenses of the due diligence work were not paid for by the town. Due to her presence at the March 27, 2018 meeting, it's clear that the mayor was aware of the foundation's interest in advance of the commissioners. Whether the mayor was aware of the project before that meeting is unclear, but given the nature of the activities underway, that timing and the source of the mayor's knowledge is deemed unimportant. The mayor's knowledge was due either to direct contact from the foundation, family connections with the EDC, or conversations with town staff. In any event, one of the complaints prompting this inquiry by the town board was that the mayor did not make the commissioners aware of the foundation's interest in Hope Mills in a timely manner and/or misrepresented having prior knowledge about the project. Upon determining in May 2018 that Lake Number 2 appeared to be suitable for their purposes, foundation officials, with assistance from the EDC and town staff, introduced the project to the full Hope Mills Board of Commissioners in a closed session for that purpose on June 4th, 2018. Now, out of that first phase of work, we identified 5 separate issues for review. Number 1, did the town manager or town staff act improperly, either unethically or out of order, with respect to the due diligence work conducted by the foundation and/or the EDC on the town-owned Lake Number 2? Answer, no. Not only does this investigator find nothing improper about the staff involvement, to the contrary, most local government jurisdictions would likely have appreciated or even expected the manager's initiative on the town's behalf. It's customary in well-run jurisdictions familiar to this investigator for the chief administrative official of a town to have the latitude to pursue and vet potential opportunities on behalf of the town before presenting those matters to the elected officials. In many local governments, that is simply what managers are expected to do. Therefore, unless the manager and town staff were instructed otherwise and were acting contrary to those instructions, in our opinion, their actions were proper. Second issue. Did the mayor act improperly, either unethically or out of order by not informing the town commissioners when she first became aware of the foundation's interest in Lake Number 2? Answer, no. The length of time between her initial awareness of the foundation interest and the presentation to the full Board of Commissioners was insignificant. Further, and as a practical matter, this was also a time of changing roles among elected officials, particularly with respect to the roles and interactions of the mayor and the town board. The mayor appeared to have the best interests, the best of intentions, and a history of working with prior boards who, it appears, would not have objected to her advanced knowledge. Also, although there's no indication she did so in connection with this project, it appears that prior boards would not have objected to the mayor actually working behind the scenes to advance a project prior to its introduction to the full board. It appears to me that in previous years, the mayor was able to exercise a greater leadership role, and her actions toward that end were given greater deference by prior boards. When the new board took office in December 2017, that relationship appeared to change. The new board had different expectations and no longer endorsed solo actions of the mayor. In fact, it appears at times that the mayor's endorsement of a matter could automatically prompt opposition. Instead, as the board is certainly allowed to do, this new board insisted on being the primary, initial, and ultimate decision maker. As a result, 2018, in our view, was a time of transition into these new roles and expectations. These differing roles are neither right nor wrong. Both are lawful. Their effectiveness in governing the jurisdiction depends entirely on the personalities involved, the level of communication about roles and expectations, and whether the persons involved accept their roles and work together. Either scenario can be effective. And I mentioned to you that one of the statutes that we looked to in our review was 160A67, General Powers of the Mayor and Council, which says, except as otherwise provided by law, the government and general management of the city shall be vested in the council. The powers and duties of the mayor shall be such as are conferred upon him by law, together with such other powers and duties as may be conferred upon him by the council pursuant to law. So the mayor has such powers as the council decides he or she has. And I think those roles were different in 2018 than they had been before. The third issue was the manner or procedure in which the foundation project was initially vetted improper, that is, unethical or out of order. Answer, no. It was reported to me that economic development projects are not frequently presented to the town of Hope Mills. There's not a history of such opportunities coming before the town for review or a history of exposure to the statutory and practical procedures for handling an economic development project. That statute that I mentioned earlier, 158-77.1, that includes the procedures for handling an economic development project, is about 3 pages long. It didn't appear that the town had experience with that type of project. However, while the town was in uncharted territory, the EDC was very familiar with the applicable statutory and practical procedures for such projects, and they followed those procedures entirely. The same procedures would have been followed by the EDC with respect to interest in any other town-owned property in Cumberland County. Typically, in the normal course of economic development activities, those procedures start with a project being brought to the attention of the town manager, who first gauges whether there is any interest by the town and determines what information ought to be gathered and presented to the board in order for the board to make an informed decision. The manager then brings the appropriate town staff together to review and vet the project and obtain that information. That's not to say the board should be kept uninformed. There may have been an opportunity to make the board aware of the foundation's interest in this matter prior to June 4, when the board became aware at the closed session. However, doing so would have been for informational purposes only until the due diligence work was completed and the foundation was ready to move forward and could confirm that the site was suitable. The foundation was understandably cautious about getting too far along in a public process after its disappointing experience with the site in Linden. Issue number 4. Was it improper, that is unethical or out of order, for an EDC employee to assist the foundation in attempting to site its project in Hope Mills when that employee is related to the mayor? Answer, no. The EDC staff member had no financial interest in the outcome of the foundation's decision and no promise of remuneration from the foundation. Instead, it appears that he was performing his job duties as assigned, but with the added personal incentive that he genuinely thought he was bringing a coveted project to his hometown, a town in need of economic development opportunities. Additionally, just as there had been no history of economic development projects to consider in Hope Mills, there had been no significant working relationship between the town and the EDC. A review of the EDC website as of the date of this report, which is about 2 weeks ago, reveals that they have one site listed in Hope Mills, and it's a privately owned site. There are no municipal owned sites on their list of available sites. The foundation project provided both the first economic development project in recent times and the first opportunity for the town to work with the EDC on any project. The EDC and its staff, in our view, acted professionally in all respects throughout its work on the Lone Survivor Foundation project. Phase 2. The project gets presented to the commissioners for your review. On June 4, 2018, the town board conducted 2 closed session meetings for the purpose of discussing the foundation's economic development opportunity. In the first closed session, the board received a presentation on the project. Presentation was delivered by the EDC representative and mayor's son, Teddy Warner, and by officials from the foundation. Similar to the earlier reaction of the town staff, initial reaction by the board at that closed session meeting was also reported to be extremely positive and even enthusiastic. Words used to describe the reaction to me were very happy about it, gung-ho. With the exception of Commissioner Mitchell, all of the other commissioners were reported to be very supportive. And Commissioner Mitchell's reluctance appeared to be based on perceived value of the property as compared to the yet-to-be-determined offering price by the foundation. There was no discussion at this meeting about the potential use of Lake Number 2 for water supply purposes or for parks and recreation needs. At the second closed session about the foundation project held that same night, neither the foundation nor the EDC representatives were present. One of the allegations arising from this particular meeting is that the mayor was asked about and misrepresented having prior knowledge about the foundation project. On June 11, the board again discussed the project in closed session, and the consensus was not to sell the property outright, but to research further the possibility of a lease or a sale with a right of reversion. On June 18, the board conducted a fourth closed session meeting. During this meeting, the board decided not to move forward with the foundation's proposal. On July 23, 2018, foundation representatives appeared at the board meeting, and following public comment, the board voted to hold a public hearing. Note that the public hearing that is a typical component of an economic development project as required by GS 158-7.1 is not the type of public hearing that was being suggested at that meeting. That 158-7.1 hearing is the statutorily required public hearing that typically comes after a board has tentatively determined that a project is suitable for a site and that the board plans to or desires to proceed with a land conveyance involving transfer of property. Due to the nature of economic development projects, the details of such projects are rarely, if ever, discussed except in staff-level conversations, quiet due diligence work, and town board meetings in closed session prior to this statutorily required public hearing. The proposed public hearing being discussed by the town board in late July was not for the purpose of obtaining public comments before taking action on a land conveyance. Instead, the hearing was designed to gauge public support for the project before details had been worked out, and in particular, the siting of the project on Lake Number 2. The July 23rd meeting included a spirited discussion, prompting extensive comments from elected officials, foundation officials, and its supporters. After some discussion, the board left the board's chambers, moved into closed session. Meanwhile, the foundation and its supporters continued to discuss the project in the board's absence. During the closed session, board comments in opposition to the foundation project included concerns about the process, concerns about EDC involvement, concerns about preserving Lake Number 2 site for water supply purposes or for parks and recreation needs in the future. On August 1, the board decided to cancel the public hearing and wait for the Parks and Recreation Plan. From that phase of the project, we have 7 issues. First, was the manner or procedure in which the foundation project was presented to the town board improper? That is, either unethical or out of order. Answer, yes. The sequence of the presentation to the board was out of order. Where this investigator finds error is in the town staff's failure to provide the board with information about the proposed opportunity prior to allowing foundation the foundation and the EDC to present the project to the board. That's not an ethical issue. That's a best practices issue. While the project may not have been ripe for presentation to the board prior to June 4, once it was ready, the town staff, in our view, should have ensured that it controlled the presentation to the board and that the board was fully aware prior to inviting foundation officials to the meeting. Having foundation officials involved in the initial introduction allowed emotions to come into play and the foundation's expectations to be established prior to the board having an opportunity for objective review of the project, its impacts, or thorough consideration of the proposed site. In other words, the board got staked out or staked itself out. And your positive reaction to the foundation led those officials to believe the project and its preferred site were essentially a fait accompli. These early established high expectations led to the foundation's lack of understanding when the board's positions changed, and also led to the foundation's persistence in the following months. Next issue. Did the town board fail to follow legal requirements with regard to the timing or procedures required for calling a public hearing on the foundation project? Answer, no. As indicated, a public hearing was not legally required at this point. The calls for transparency and greater public input in July of 2018 were being driven at that time by consideration of the underlying issue of whether to work with the foundation, and if so, whether Lake Number 2 was the appropriate site. That public hearing was not the legal condition precedent to approval of the land conveyance. Third issue, did the closed session discussions or subsequent conduct by the town board in connection with the foundation violate any laws or ethical policies? Answer, no. Although it appears that disclosure may have occurred of information obtained or discussed in closed session, such disclosure is not illegal. However, breaches of confidence allowed by a closed session may be inconsistent with the town's code of ethics requirement that board members exhibit trustworthiness. Next issue. Did the mayor violate any ethical policies during the inquiry into her prior knowledge of the foundation project? Answer, no, not based on what we could confirm. However, the answer here depends not on whether the mayor had prior knowledge of the project, but on whether the answer that was given was truthful. The facts on this issue simply cannot be determined. There are conflicting reports about the exact question that was asked and about the exact answer that was given. In the opinion of the investigator, while the facts are inconclusive, they do not warrant a finding of misrepresentation. Despite repeated efforts to reconstruct exactly what was said and by whom at the second closed session meeting of June 4th, there's no consistency in those answers. Similarly, the town clerk's minutes from the June 11 meeting were revisited and revised 3 times, and there was still not a consensus that the version of the minutes finally approved by a majority of the board actually reflected the meeting discussions accurately. As an aside, if the mayor did answer untruthfully, that would, in our view, constitute a violation of the town's code of ethics, which has a mandate of promoting honesty and forthrightness. Section 2 of your code of ethics says board members should act with integrity. Next issue. If the mayor misrepresented having prior knowledge about the project, did others in the meeting, including the town manager and/or town attorney, have a duty to inform the town board? Answer, no. Even assuming that a misrepresentation occurred, which could not be concluded, it was not, in our view, a material fact in the analysis of the merits of the issue before the board. The fact that the mayor had prior knowledge of the project would not be a relevant factor in an objective analysis of the merits of the foundation project or in the town's interest in utilizing Lake Number 2 for that purpose. Furthermore, that prior knowledge only serves to undermine the project without regard to its merits, given the then existing tension which manifested itself as, if she is for it, I'm against it. That prior knowledge only bears, in our view, on the mayor-board relationship and their transitioning roles as previously discussed. That is not to say that a manager or attorney never have a duty to disclose a misrepresentation. The International City Manager Code of Ethics shed some light on that issue. And whether your manager is a member of that organization or not, those ICMA Code of Ethics provide guidance on ethical considerations of a town manager, and a town manager may have a duty under some circumstances to inform his or her board of the true facts concerning a question asked by one elected official to another where the response is material and clearly misleading. Similarly, with a town attorney, under the State Bar Rules of Professional Conduct, Rule 1.13, and a town attorney may have a duty to advise the board in the event of a misrepresentation. Next issue, did the town board violate any ethical requirements in connections with its review of the LSF proposal? Answer, no. However, our answer here depends on whether the positions taken were fact-based, honest, and truthful. And we cannot know or determine the intent or state of mind of those who oppose the project and whether the stated reasons for opposition were valid or legitimate. Reasons were offered that, while not appearing objectively reasonable to some, may have been very real to the persons offering them. The town's Code of Ethics requires board members exhibit trustworthiness. Although hardball politics can make a board ineffective or even dysfunctional, such conduct cannot be automatically characterized as unethical. Legislative discourtesies, while impolite, are not necessarily automatically unethical. However, advancing baseless positions would be inconsistent with the town's Code of Ethics. This brings me back to my point earlier about you know whether it was right or wrong, but I can't tell you whether it was right or wrong. Your Code of Ethics doesn't automatically make it wrong. Next issue, did conduct by town board members outside of the formal foundation review process violate any ethical requirements? Answer, no. Here it's been alleged that there were public records requests by board members, alliances with media promoters taking priority over working as a member of the team, that is the board, advancing personal private agendas occurring at the expense of the board, social media posting and comments, and media interviews. These actions are not illegal, with the exception that there would be an open meetings violation if board members are communicating electronically on town business. But the other actions are not illegal. They can at times be incompatible with the goal of elected officials working together, and they can be inconsistent with the town's code of ethics. On the other hand, your ethics code requires that you act with independence and use your best judgment to pursue the common good as you see it. In my opinion, the conduct listed above does not warrant a conclusion that it violates the town's ethics policy under the circumstances then existing. I would also have to acknowledge that a reasonable person might disagree. The third phase of the project. It comes back to you again. By offer dated October 1, 2018, the foundation made its first formal offer to purchase the property at Lake Number 2. The offer indicated it was accompanied by earnest money. The offer was submitted through a real estate agent working with the foundation. By this time, the EDC had withdrawn from further involvement in the foundation's efforts for Lake Number 2. At the board meeting held on October 8th, the town board voted to decline that offer. I have a single issue with this phase, and that was, did town board members violate any legal, ethical requirements or best practices in connection with the review or decision in response to the formal foundation offer? And the answer is no. The town was under no duty to convey the property, and although elected officials were split on the matter, a majority of the board had previously indicated no desire to do so. The persistence of the foundation in presenting a formal offer was due to the public support it was receiving. Early indications from town staff and from elected officials that the project was supported at Lake Number 2, and a divided board calling for a public hearing when a majority no longer actually supported the project as proposed. In conclusion, while the town's dealings with the Lone Survivor Foundation left a bad impression on those involved, it does not appear to this investigator to be due to intentional ethical lapses or any intentional misconduct on the part of the town staff, mayor, or any elected officials, the EDC, or the Lone Survivor Foundation. Instead, it is attributable to a combination of rookie mistakes, changing governance policies, including inviting the foundation into the initial closed session briefing with the board's change in position after its initially warm reception of the foundation that to those foundation officials was never satisfactorily explained to them, and changes going on at that time in mayor and board relations. Those are our opinions. Thank you for the opportunity to do this assignment. I hope we gave you something of value. Probably, I suspect that much of what you heard you already knew, but that's our report, and I have copies for everyone. Would you like those now?
Yes, sir. So I have actually several questions, if that's possible to ask you.
I don't mind taking questions. I may, I'll answer if I can. The answer may be, you need to look at that further.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. I am the commissioner that did ask if the mayor was aware of this on June 4th, which the answer to the question was no. And I asked it again, and then we did discuss it as a board, where the town manager and our attorney both confirmed that they knew that at that time she was not telling the truth, but did not speak up. So I'm just curious, when you were doing these interviews, did you ask, because I know that my fellow board members heard that along with Mr. Hartzog and Melissa, so want to know how you determined that you couldn't determine whether it was truthful when basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of us are saying it did happen.
In my review of it, it was not that clear. And I'm not going to cite to who said what,
Okay.
but I will say that the answers I got were not consistent. The question was recalled being presented in several different ways, and the answer was recalled being presented in several different ways.
Okay.
We've remedied that in that we have decided to go back to recording all of our closed session minutes, so there won't be any more doubt in the future about what's said. We used to record them at some point in between 2013 and now. They stopped recording the closed session minutes. And as you can see, it leads to he said, she said. But I concur with Commissioner Larson that our trust in our mayor ended that day, and that's one of the reasons we asked for an investigation. Some specific things I asked for haven't been answered either. And I will say to the public that all I was talking about on the Lake Bed number 2 was how the Fayetteville Cumberland EDC came about with a suggested price, and we talked about acreage and tax values and that type of thing. That it's well known that the Hope Mills Historic Preservation Commission has had a brochure about the preservation of that lake bed for well over 10 years now.
Are these questions of
These are some
me?
questions in regards to these studies. We still don't know. We were told there was a verbal from our town manager for the engineering group to go on our property and just start doing these studies and digging in our soil. But when we check with engineering groups, they say, we don't do that without express written permission, as I would assume most professionals would require. Did you, in your investigation, determine if the engineering group did indeed receive any written express authorization to do soil testing at Lake Bed number 2?
What I determined was that the EDC was authorized by the town staff to take the initiative on that work.
So in this world that we live in, if this was outside of the realms of a municipality and something called an economic development project, which I still, in fact, one of the directors of the Fayetteville Cumberland EDC said, quote, this never was really an economic development project to my face in a meeting in February of this year. So how it is, I still don't understand the economic development side of it, but I'm just trying to figure out what engineering group takes a verbal to enter on our property and start digging around and looking for environmental issues. It seems unorthodox. It also seems unorthodox that there's no written agreement between Town of Hope Mills and Fayetteville Cumberland EDC to represent our interest in the sale of real estate, be it a letter, engagement letter, a contract, a power of attorney, a letter of understanding. There's nothing but a verbal.
And the reality is that's probably more common than the formal arrangement.
So in the municipal
Not
world,
saying that that's the way you would want to do it. If you can certainly change how Hope Mills does it, but I think
so environmental issue, we find out there's a $2 million cleanup now, and this board didn't even have knowledge that they were down on the property. What are we here for? Because I don't understand anymore. Is that the realm?
Is that a
the power
question?
of our town manager now? To tell an engineering group that they can go down and dig on our property for environmental issues, for possible problems, and this board has no knowledge of it?
I would say that is within the realm of the scope of authority of a town manager unless you tell him or her otherwise.
Seems odd to me.
One of the other questions that I did have still, as far as Fayetteville, Cumberland County Economic Development filling out paperwork as the owner of the property. They filled out the owner survey. How is that possible that someone fills out paperwork listing themselves as the owner of Hope Mills property and being legal?
Again, they were authorized by the town staff to assist the foundation with the investigation and due diligence on this site. And there may not be a piece of paper that says that, but they were expressly authorized to do that work.
When you say expressly, express means written, correct?
No, express means clearly.
Clearly?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Jim, thank you.
Yes, sir.
You had to dig through a lot. It sounds like you did.
You told me it was going to be a heavy lift.
I did tell you that.
Yes, sir. You were right.
I knew it from the beginning. Let me ask you something, though. You mentioned the closed session on June 4th, that there may have been some issues with how that unfolded in closed session, of how it was presented to the board initially and who was there. What would be the best practices to learn from? Because that's what this investigation's about. Can't undo what was done, but we can learn from what was done and share it. And I would surely like other municipalities to never go through something that we did at that point. And if this can be a lessons learned document, then it's well worth every dime that we've put in it. But what should have happened on June 4th, in your opinion?
The board should, if that is the point in time when the due diligence was complete and the foundation was clear that it wanted that piece of property. In my view, the board should have been briefed at that point. It would have been okay for EDC to be there, but I would not have recommended that the potential client
Right.
be in that meeting. I think you set expectations at that meeting with your reaction. It's a very emotional presentation, and I think your reaction to it, as anybody's would, was positive, and they're sitting in the room with you. And once you had an opportunity to more thoroughly review and think about it, you weren't as supportive. But you couldn't put that toothpaste back in the tube with the foundation. They couldn't quite understand why the turnaround.
Well, Jim, the reason why I asked that is because I think that's where the train jumped the track, is right there. I do. And I know my own personal feelings about Lone Survivor, having known about their prior projects in the state because of my affiliation with the Veteran Service Organization. I knew about them, I knew about Linden, and I knew about what they were doing, and fully support what they do every day to support our nation's veterans. So yeah, I was overcome by just having them there, because I honestly thought they were building in Linden, and I didn't know that they had actually moved out of Linden into another project. So they shouldn't have been there at the closed session. It should have just been
Not
town
in my,
staff.
not in my opinion.
Not in your opinion.
You know, it could have worked out fine, but it didn't.
But if memory serves me right, Jim, they did make an initial offer of some type in a PowerPoint presentation. I think I have it with me, but of what they were looking for. Didn't they quote? It was a quote of property that they were looking for, an amount for that property.
But I don't really think that's the issue.
Okay, that's why I'm asking you.
I-
Because Jim, they were enthusiastic too.
Absolutely.
They were. Both of them were. In fact, the whole room was, except the board, because we had no prior knowledge of any of it prior to that closed session.
I think the better practice is for your staff to bring you the project, get you up to speed, and get instructions. And then maybe you meet with the client, maybe you don't.
And I agree with you, Jim. We had not had a prior project from the Economic Commission come before this board. So we really had no protocol or procedures to follow or guidelines to use when this project comes. So that's a lessons learned right there. If another project comes before this board, we know now.
And that occurred 2 weeks ago. We got a 110-acre mixed-use property that I had in-depth discussions with the broker, referred them to Chancellor McLaughlin, our planner. Our planner took it. They're looking at serious annexation into our town. It's possible $200 million. That's economic development.
Congratulations.
And our town manager released disclosure to all of us just this past week.
Excellent.
So there's already been lessons learned, Jim, from the report that you've worked on. That's value.
Well.
That is value.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Jim, thank you very much for all your work and having to go through this process. Excuse me. Weather's getting to me. It's not cold weather, it's hot weather. I think the lesson that we have all learned right here is we just need to move forward. We need to bond together. We need to become a team. And we need to do what's best for this town and our citizens of this town. I hope we can work in that direction. And I can see in the last few months that we have been working together a little bit better than what we've done for the last year and a half. But I would just like to see us put all this behind us and do what's best for our citizens. And again, I thank you very much for being here in your presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions?
We appreciate your time, Attorney Caldan. You put a lot of work and effort into it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I would like to thank the community that came tonight and also the members of the media that are here. Would also let you know that as mayor of Hope Mills, there's been different hats I've had to wear over all these years, and I've had to work with a variety of different people. I strive to put the best foot forward and to work for the town of Hope Mills. I don't do anything without thinking first, is it right? Is it ethical? I don't like the idea of my integrity and my character being judged. And it has, my family has, my son and my husband are here this evening. Robert Van Giens is here this evening. And I just want you to know that what you do sometimes in politics, it does hurt. But you do have to move forward. And as mayor of Hope Mills, I try every day to make sure that I represent Hope Mills the very best I can. And I, too, will have to say we need to move forward and put this behind us. But I, too, will never give up and say that the lone survivor was a good thing for Hope Mills. And I was excited, and I will continue to be excited that they did stay in Cumberland County. I do appreciate this board. I am trying my darndest to learn to work with each and every one of them. But as we are all individuals, it does take, like the attorney said, rookies have to get through the first year, and now we're in our second year. And what we've got to do now is to build this team from now till November, and the economic development things are coming our way. I appreciate everything, Mr. Van Giens, you've done for Hope Mills, and the fact that you are, and we are, on your radar. That's something that was just wasn't happening back in 2011 when I was first elected mayor. I do believe that a lot of things have happened over the course of these years that are positive for Hope Mills. And again, I appreciate you being here tonight, and I hope that we can move forward. And I do hope that after this evening, that all the negative conversations on social media, all the negative articles in reference to us, stop. I believe if we're going to move forward, the citizens of Hope Mills have to understand we need your support now. We don't need to be torn apart anymore. I appreciate you being here.
Great.
Thank you so much for everything that you've done. And at this time, I want to thank our staff again. I think everything that has been said tonight has said that you did the things you were supposed to do. And you did what is expected of a town manager, Ms. Adams. I am very proud of the fact that you have brought great leadership to Hope Mills, and I continue to support you and our staff in everything they do. So at this time, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, sir, and we'll see you all on Monday night at our next meeting.